What's the first thing you think of when you hear the name Christopher Nolan? An image? A sound? Is it big budget action spectacle? A visual set piece? Or stripped down neo-noir? Is it a story about time, space, memory, identity, or architecture? Maybe it's collaborators like Emma Thomas, his wife and producer, or his brother and co-writer Jonathan Nolan, or cinematographers Wally Pfister and Hoyte van Hoytema, or composers Hans Zimmer and Ludwig Göransson. Maybe it's actors he loves, like Christian Bale, Cillian Murphy, Anne Hathaway, Tom Hardy, Michael Caine, or Matt Damon. For me, the first thing I think of when I hear the name Christopher Nolan is a man in a suit trying to solve a puzzle. This well-dressed, dashing man is always at the center of a maze, a mystery, or both. Sometimes his own, sometimes another character's. He is a loner, a detective, an artist, a raconteur, a philosopher, a showman. He is isolated and withdrawn, but is a man of action. He suffers quietly while keeping a cool exterior. He is remarkably capable, but full of doubt. He is brilliant, but there are cracks in his brilliance. He tries to make sense of a nonsensical world. He is wary of sharing too much about himself. The Nolan protagonist is a clear stand-in for the writer-director himself. Though he never claims his films are autobiographical, it doesn't take much to recognize the patterns and similarities he shares with his leading men. Following is about a man who breaks into people's homes and rifles through their things, which Nolan wrote after coming home one day to find his apartment broken into. Inception is about a gifted artist/thief on the run, trying to find a way back to his family, which Nolan wrote after making 3 big studio movies in 4 years, which kept him away from home. Interstellar is about a pilot so desperate to prove his love to his daughter that he travels through space and time to tell her. It was made under the working title Flora's Letter, named after Nolan's daughter. The Dark Knight trilogy is about a loner who masks himself in order to do good while fighting his darkest impulses, made by a man whose steely demeanor reveals almost nothing about himself, letting his work speak for him. Oppenheimer is about a physicist burdened with genius and unimaginable guilt for the destructive thing he created, a story I'm sure Nolan was drawn to for numerous reasons. Throughout his career, Christopher Nolan has been many things: a Sundance hopeful, a young hotshot with something to prove, an action auteur, a father, an Oscar winner. He is arguably the most famous filmmaker on the planet, and still one of the only writer-directors who can consistently turn an original film into a global hit. His films have earned a cumulative $6 billion worldwide, a number that will get even bigger this year with the release of The Odyssey. Nolan has been a populist phenomenon for 20 years. Basically, since Batman Begins, he has been one of the most constantly discussed, most widely beloved filmmakers who has remained relevant to the culture of movies. He convinced IMAX to literally build new cameras for him to use. He's one of few filmmakers who can eventize a movie on his name alone. He is a Hollywood figurehead in a league with James Cameron, Ridley Scott, and Steven Spielberg, but if you asked someone under the age of 25, they might not even recognize those other names. That is not to say that he isn't divisive. Nolan has many critics and many major criticisms, which I will get into. This is a wide-ranging discussion on his works, his themes, his personal life, at least what we know of it, and his talents and drawbacks as a director. My relationship to Nolan has changed over the years. I began, like many white guys my age, as a superfan when I saw Batman Begins shortly after it came out in 2005. I was 13 at the time, and when you're a 13-year-old boy, Batman is a sacred text. As I saw more of the man's work, the bigger a fan I became. I saw The Dark Knight and Inception in theaters, and they were extremely powerful, memorable experiences for me. After that, I sought out all the films he'd made that I hadn't seen, and Nolan became one of my guys. In my late 20s, while I deeply admired and respected the work he was doing, I was starting to wonder if he only had one trick up his sleeve. I still enjoyed the films because they were well made and he's clearly a great director, but it kind of seemed like the spectacle had taken over everything, and I no longer felt emotionally attached to the stories. Now, I was going through a lot of changes at the time, finding myself, as everyone does in their 20s, and Nolan seemed to be going through many changes too. The movies became a bit colder and more distant, more abstract, more like something to dissect rather than to enjoy. It felt like Nolan was trying to outdo his own concepts with each movie, trying to top himself with complex, layered narratives, multiple timelines, and Rube Goldberg-style constructions. I was also just discovering many other filmmakers at this time, and my tastes had started to change. Now, in my mid-30s, I've sort of come back around to the wonder and excitement of these movies that I felt when I was younger. Dunkirk and Interstellar are two, for example, that I didn't love when I first saw, but now appreciate as much as any of my favorites. The Odyssey is one of my most anticipated movies of the year, and even though I'm doing a separate review of that film apart from this discussion, it's basically what led me to do this project. Before we get into the films, let's talk just a little bit about Nolan's beginnings. Christopher Nolan grew up with one foot in America and the other in Great Britain. His father was a British advertising executive and his mother an American flight attendant, and the family split their time between London and Evanston, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago. Chris went to boarding school in the UK while his brother Jonah grew up in the States, which is why Jonah has an American accent and Chris has a British one. Living in these two cities greatly informed their films together, the Dark Knight trilogy in particular. Nolan began making films on Super 8 cameras before he was even 10 years old, inspired by 2001, A Space Odyssey, and Star Wars. By his teenage years, he had fully committed to the idea of becoming a movie director, making shorts with his childhood friend Rocco Bellick. During this period, he was often far away from his family, at boarding school in England while they were across the pond, a theme that would return many times throughout his professional life. But it was at University College London where his career began to take shape, as he half-studied English literature while using the school's 16mm cameras and editing suite and flirted with a history student named Emma Thomas, who was also interested in film. Nolan graduated in 1993 and immediately began working in commercial and industrial films, following the path of Ridley Scott, one of his heroes. During this time, he made the shorts Larceny and Doodlebug, using resources from the student union at UCL. These films played at a few minor festivals and got Nolan his first bit of recognition. He and Thomas were married in 1997 and, having trouble getting support from the British film industry, decided to try and make a full feature themselves, shooting on weekends with friends over the course of a year for just £3,000. This, his first film, is Following, from 1998, a stripped-down neo-noir that has as much in common with The Maltese Falcon and The Asphalt Jungle as it does with the early films of Steven Soderbergh and Kevin Smith. It was written, directed, shot, and edited by Nolan himself out of financial necessity, giving it a true independent spirit. It is shot on grainy black and white 16mm film with available light, in a bare-bones, run-and-gun shooting style. Although we have now seen dozens of indie movies that look and feel like this, the film still feels fresh today. It is about a young writer who has a very peculiar habit of following people around in the street. He tells us in the opening moments the particulars of this, like how he never follows the same person twice. Presumably he is using this behavior for writing material, but it isn't until he meets a man called Cobb, a name Nolan will reuse later, that the real action of the movie begins. Cobb is a well-dressed and well-spoken thief who breaks into people's homes and rifles through their things, sometimes taking them, sometimes just upending their lives. You take it away to show them what they had, he says. The writer, played by Jeremy Theobald, a school friend of Nolan's who will have cameos in his future filmography, is being questioned in the murder of a young woman, a femme fatale we meet midway through the film who is a classic noir pastiche. The writer is being framed, set up by Cobb, who has used him in a long con full of misdirection and blackmail. With his very first movie, Nolan introduces his primary narrative apparatus of nonlinear storytelling, which in the States had already been repopularized by Quentin Tarantino and Steven Soderbergh. He is also already experimenting with genre in the form of noir, using it to tell a story which extends from a very personal place. Nolan came home one night to find his door kicked in and found several personal items missing. This event formed the basis of his short film Larceny and was then expounded on in Following, which explores the idea of getting inside the head of a petty thief. What are they thinking? Why are they doing this? I've never felt particularly strongly about this film one way or another, but I do think it is a very assured work of a first-time filmmaker, and it has the DNA of a lot of what Nolan will go on to explore in the rest of his career, things like obsession, process, and identity. Curiously enough, it is the only one of his films to get a release from the Criterion Collection, being recognized for its no-budget innovation and guerrilla spirit. If his first film was a teaser of what's to come, then Nolan's second film could be considered the opening scene. Memento, another neo-noir starring Guy Pearce, Carrie-Anne Moss, and Joe Pantoliano, landed in the indie film landscape like a lightning bolt in 2000. The film is a dizzying formal exercise where the events play in reverse order, yet we watch them in forward time, trying to piece them together. The main character, Leonard Shelby, is an insurance investigator whose short-term memory has disappeared in the aftermath of a vicious attack that also left his wife dead. This is, indeed, the first instance of the infamous dead wife problem in Nolan's movies. Shelby is attempting to piece back together the sequence of events that led to this, writing endless reams of notes and tattooing important bits of information all over his body, mementos to remind himself of his mission. That mission is to find John G., the mysterious figure who perpetrated the inciting incident. However, we begin at the end of this story, as Leonard has just killed a man, the Polaroid of the moment of death, forming and unforming. Leonard's memory is unreliable, thus, so is he. Again, Nolan is using the common tropes of genre to get across a bigger idea about memory and identity. It is adapted from a short story by his brother Jonathan called Memento Mori, which itself was inspired by a true story from their lives which each brother remembers completely differently. Chris says, "I don't know whether he was there or not. We will literally never know the answer. Some issues you can verify one way or another, sort of figure it out. But a lot of them you can't. The truth is, our memories don't work the way we think they work." That confusion and inability to verify an event is present throughout the movie, and most comes into play during moments of high stress and tension for Leonard, when he frantically tries but can't find a pen to write down what has just happened, is either chasing or being chased by a man in a trailer park, or is relaying the story of a man whose condition is similar to his over the phone to someone we never see or hear. When I first saw the movie, much later in probably 07 or 08, it blew my mind. I had seen a few films with nonlinear narratives before, but nothing like the puzzle box of putting the film back together backwards in your head as you watch it forwards. Having seen it many times since, it's still technically impressive, and Guy Pearce is extraordinary, even if the message of the movie is a little bit muddled. Are we supposed to root for Leonard? Is he justified? Can we trust him? Can we trust anyone in this film? A notable step up from the run-and-gun production of Following, Nolan was now working with established actors, a DP who will come to define his visual style in Wally Pfister, and with a healthy budget of $4 million, shooting in Montreal and Los Angeles. The film was an enormous word-of-mouth success, playing the most prestigious festivals in Venice, Toronto, and Sundance, and taking in $25 million at the box office. It was Nolan's first big break and gave him the opportunity to use the phrase from the director of Memento in future marketing, which of course would come into play on his next film. In 2002, Nolan got the first chance to prove what he's made of in Hollywood. His first studio movie, made for Warner Brothers and featuring some of the biggest movie stars in the world, was actually a remake of a 1997 Norwegian film called Insomnia. Nolan vied for the job after hearing that talks of a remake were going around, being a fan of the original and curious about what he could do with the story. Insomnia, starring Oscar winners Al Pacino, Robin Williams, and Hilary Swank, is Nolan's first collaboration with another writer other than his brother, and another woman other than his wife, the film being written by Hilary Seitz. It was also produced by Steven Soderbergh and George Clooney, who came to back Nolan after seeing Memento on the festival circuit. It is another psychological thriller and another detective mystery. Both concepts by now Nolan was very familiar with and seemed to have a fascination for. The film follows an LA homicide detective on assignment in a remote town in Alaska, investigating a murder of a teen girl there. During this time of year, the sun never sets, disorienting the detective and leading him to suffer from, you guessed it, insomnia. In a thrilling sequence on a fog-covered beach, Pacino's character Will Dormer accidentally shoots his partner, mistaking him for the killer they've tracked to a rundown cabin nearby. The killer, played by Robin Williams, witnesses this tragedy from afar and uses it as leverage against Dormer, calling him on the phone and toying with his sanity. They come to an uneasy agreement on board a ferry where Williams' face is first seen and his character is revealed to be a fiction writer with a peculiar relationship to the dead teenage girl. While I would place the film near the bottom of Nolan's filmography, it is at times a gripping thriller and features an amazing performance from Robin Williams, who plays his character like a ghost, saying to Dormer at one point, "You made your own choices. It's like I wasn't even there." Pacino is quite literally falling asleep during some scenes, taking method acting to a whole new level, but he is believable as a ragged detective at the end of his rope. The film was shot primarily in Canada, with aerial photography done in Alaska, where it is set. Swank's character Ellie Burr is a young, bright cop on her way to greatness, piecing together the mystery as Dormer and Finch do their dirty work in the darkness. While she is capable, Burr is severely underwritten and doesn't give Swank much to work with, beginning a long history of Nolan's female characters being secondary to the male ones. The film was a success, making $113 million worldwide against a $45 million budget, and received numerous positive reviews, putting Nolan in the unlikely position to be able to choose his next project, one that would define him for almost a decade. In 2005, after failing to reboot the Batman franchise with Darren Aronofsky and Frank Miller, Warner Brothers hired Nolan along with screenwriter David S. Goyer to breathe new life into the superhero property. Their approach was to create a grounded, realistic character and world, eschewing the Art Deco style of the Tim Burton films and the bright, campy pop of Joel Schumacher's. The result was Batman Begins, which ushered in the era of dark and gritty superhero storytelling, though it could be argued that 1998's Blade and 2000's X-Men started that trend. The movie stars Christian Bale as Bruce Wayne, Michael Caine as his butler Alfred, Gary Oldman as intrepid Lieutenant Jim Gordon, and Morgan Freeman as Lucius Fox, Batman's right-hand man, who runs the Applied Sciences division of Wayne Enterprises. It begins Nolan's many collaborations with all these actors as well as Cillian Murphy in the villainous role of Scarecrow. The film is a clear origin story, tracing Bruce's life from the death of his parents as a child to his training with Ra's al Ghul in a snowy Himalayan village to his emergence as the Caped Crusader in Gotham, determined to take down the criminal cabal of Carmine Falcone, played by Tom Wilkinson. For my money, it is the best Batman origin story put on the big screen, choosing to focus on the inner battle within Bruce as an outer battle rages for the soul of Gotham. Batman Begins is a pivotal point in Nolan's career as well as Christian Bale's, anointing the former as a new key Hollywood figure and the latter as an action movie star. It also marked his first collaboration with composer Hans Zimmer, who would be integral in defining the sound of Nolan's films moving forward. The film shot all over the world, with New York, London, and Chicago standing in for Gotham, part of Nolan's effort to make the world feel familiar and grounded. The director wanted to focus more on character growth and drama as opposed to the heightened style and fantasy of previous Batman movies. However, the film was directly influenced by classic comic book arcs of the character, such as Loeb and Sale's The Long Halloween and Batman Dark Victory, and Frank Miller's Batman Year One. Nolan was also heavily inspired by the story of Howard Hughes and repurposed his own scrapped Howard Hughes project as a template for Bruce Wayne, knowing that going up against Martin Scorsese's just-released Hughes biopic The Aviator would be a tough task. Of the film's globe-trotting nature, Nolan says, "When I was writing Batman Begins, I spent time in San Francisco and London. Interestingly, when the film came out, it was considered to be a bit gritty and real compared to the other films. The reality is, it's a very romanticized film, a very classical film. If you're looking for an emotional connection to landscape, I think, of all my films, Batman Begins is the most successful in that regard." The movie's success did not stop there. It went on to a worldwide total of $371 million, assuring both Nolan as a filmmaker and the Batman franchise had a very bright future ahead. However, for his next trick, the director would have something very different up his sleeve. Before prepping the sequel to his enormously successful venture into IP, Nolan decided to return to the slightly smaller scope that had marked his early career, reteaming with his brother Jonah on a script about two rival magicians in late 19th century England. Starring Hugh Jackman, Christian Bale, Michael Caine, Scarlett Johansson, Rebecca Hall, and David Bowie, The Prestige is one of Nolan's most accomplished and assured films. It combines the parallel timelines he is so obsessed with and the theatricality and deception, to quote Ra's al Ghul, that he improves upon with each successive film, though possibly never more satisfying than here. The film follows a dangerous and tragic competition between two men to be the best and most widely regarded illusionist in London. The film showing us each side of their respective stories while also interweaving their exploits together. Robert Angier, played by Hugh Jackman, is a gifted showman whose wife, played by Piper Perabo, dies in an illusion gone horribly wrong, drowned in a water tank because she could not slip the ropes which bound her hands together. Yes, another dead wife. Alfred Borden, a natural magician with no knack for pageantry, is the man responsible for tying the knot, though he cannot remember which one he tied, leading to a never-ending plot of revenge and betrayal between the two men. Throughout, we see Angier's travels to try and construct the greatest illusion the world has ever seen, inspired by spite for Borden's trick, the transported man, which seems impossible to the human eye. Both men are constantly circling each other, inspecting one another's diaries for hints at how each achieved their prestige or final step of the illusion. When I first saw this film, it became a fast favorite. I loved the bifurcated timelines and the sense of grandeur in it, the idea of creative competition bound by trying to one-up someone who has wronged you. By the end of the film, we aren't sure if either of these men are good or who we should be rooting for, but if we have been watching closely, as the first words spoken implore us to, we are rewarded with shocking revelations about the nature of illusion. The entire movie is a not-so-subtle nod to the trials and tribulations of filmmaking itself, and Nolan is truly looking inward at his career for what feels like the first time. The film is wonderfully realized, with production designer Nathan Crowley authentically recreating 1890s London, and David Bowie's portrayal of radical inventor Nikola Tesla lending the film a real-world weight. While it may not be his most remembered film at this point, The Prestige still earned $109 million worldwide, was critically lauded, and received 2 Oscar nominations. It is also one of Nolan's works that most rewards rewatching, as you begin to pick up more and more clues earlier in the film about its final conclusions. If the 1-2 punch of Batman Begins and The Prestige cemented Nolan's reputation as an extraordinarily accomplished director, it would be his follow-up that became the calling card and launched him into the stratosphere. Following the successful reinvigoration of the Batman mythos, Warner Bros. Fast-tracked a sequel with Nolan at the helm, following through on an Easter egg from the final moments of Batman Begins where Gordon reveals a Joker playing card found at the scene of a crime. The Dark Knight seems to start just moments later as the film opens with a bank heist that is orchestrated by the Clown Prince of Crime, and feels ripped straight from Michael Mann's Heat. It is one of Nolan's most inspired and now most famous pieces of filmmaking. Bringing back the core cast of Bale, Caine, and Freeman, The Dark Knight also introduces Aaron Eckhart as District Attorney Harvey Dent, Heath Ledger in a posthumous Oscar win for his turn as the Joker, and recasts the love interest/assistant DA Rachel Dawes with Maggie Gyllenhaal. The film's buzz before it was even released was astounding, playing on social media in its infancy with a viral marketing campaign that included fake news stories, in-person events, and a website dedicated to the Joker's army. This was largely built to combat negative reactions around Ledger's casting, but ended up generating a frenzy of press for the film itself. To go into more detail would require its own video, so I'll just get back to the film itself. As opposed to the Bruce Wayne-centric origin of the first film, the sequel divides its time between Batman wanting to hang up the mantle, Dent going after organized crime the legal way, and the Joker sowing chaos and distrust, seemingly ahead of the heroes at every turn. It is a brilliant cat-and-mouse game that ultimately pits Gotham against itself and its White Knight, Harvey Dent, against the Dark Knight, Batman. Ledger is clearly the standout of the film and the reason it is so memorable. His air is disturbing and creepy, his line delivery is flawless, and he sneaks in between the weakest points of every character, forcing them to truly look at themselves and examine who they are. Joker is also a product of Gotham, a product of a corrupt and unfair system that spits out anyone who doesn't fit into societal norms. However, the movie makes it clear that he is unsympathetic. He's a madman, a murderer, running around, as he says, a dog chasing cars. It's a completely different kind of villainy than the League of Shadows, with their rules and codes, and one Batman isn't prepared for. The film was released to near universal acclaim. Its huge action set pieces deliver in wonder and awe. Its performances are human, heartbreaking, terrifying. And importantly, it addresses Batman's more troubling behavior, such as his mass surveillance machine that Fox uses to sniff out the Joker in the film's climax. Is this vigilante truly above the law? Is he above even a moral standard? The fact that Batman rigs the machine to self-destruct seems like a pretty clear answer, but he also created the thing in the first place, didn't he? It is hard not to overstate the massive commercial success this movie was. It broke dozens of records and became one of the 10 highest grossing films of all time, landing at just over $1 billion worldwide, making it the first superhero movie to ever do so. Many people regarded it Nolan's crowning achievement, and many more still believe it's his best movie. It was also the first movie filmed entirely with IMAX cameras, which would become one of Nolan's trademarks. As I mentioned at the top of the video, I saw it that summer of 2008 and was never really the same. The bridge and tunnel sequence with no score is mind-blowing, the interrogation scene is thrilling, Joker's pencil magic trick is hilarious and scary. Everyone at school had these lines of dialogue memorized. It was a cultural sensation, which I haven't quite seen since. For Nolan, it was the start of a new phase of his career. From now on, he would be able to achieve things he had only dreamed of previously, so he started dreaming big. To better understand Inception, Nolan's follow-up to The Dark Knight, it helps to understand one of his key influences, the surrealist Argentine writer Jorge Luis Borges. Borges was a short story writer and playwright whose work can be seen in many of Nolan's films, but most notably Inception. Nolan got the general concept of the movie from two short stories by Borges, The Secret Miracle and The Circular Ruins. I'll let the director explain why. So, the dream within a dream thing, I certainly had before I read the Borges, but The Circular Ruins is a very resonant story and I come back to it a lot. With those Borges short stories, you have to have something rattling inside you already that then connects with that. But if you're not already predisposed to that, if it just comes to you as a story, it doesn't necessarily spark anything. The other major spark of this story is, of course, the fact that Nolan has been spending a lot of time away from his family. In Inception, Dom Cobb is a mind thief. Remember in Following when he was just a petty larcenist? His job is to extract information from wealthy, powerful people's subconscious and sell it to the highest bidder. He is desperate to get home and see his children, but cannot due to the fact that the US government thinks he killed his wife. This is where Nolan's dead wife problem reaches its apex, as the character of his wife Mal, played brilliantly by Marion Cotillard, is haunting Cobb's subconscious and invading the dreams he shares with others, keeping him from achieving his goals. We learn over the course of the film that the couple once spent a large chunk of time in limbo, the lowest level of the dreamscape, creating an entire world together. But in order to escape, Dom planted an idea in Mal's mind that their world was not real. This is the concept that gives the film its title, Inception. This film marks the first time Nolan works with a host of actors, including Leonardo DiCaprio, Tom Hardy, Elliot Page, and Joseph Gordon-Levitt. It is in essence a heist thriller, but is philosophically rich with ideas about creation and fatherhood and the cost of brilliance. When I saw the film in 2010, it really solidified the Nolan protagonist theory I proposed at the beginning of this video, a man in a suit trying to solve a puzzle. Surrounding that man is a labyrinthine drama that takes place entirely inside the sleeping minds of the characters, which are assembled like a team, each carrying a piece of the dream puzzle, an architect, a chemist, a forger, etc. They are tasked with implanting an idea that a young corporate elite, played by Cillian Murphy, must break up his father's business empire and be his own man. This involves telling Murphy's character, Fisher, that he is dreaming, bringing all kinds of danger into the fold. There is some truly breathtaking imagery in the film, and Hans Zimmer's loud, brass-heavy score immediately became the stuff of both legend and meme culture, which was just developing at the time. The score has been imitated ad nauseum by other composers ever since. The older I get, the more Inception feels a little childish and a little silly within the grand scope of Nolan's filmography. I still enjoy watching it, but I can't help but feel like I'm watching a little kid play with their toys. However, it was critically lauded and got 5 Oscar nominations, winning for cinematography and sound mixing. It also raked in almost $900 million at the box office, proving Nolan could open an original movie not based on IP and turn it into a global hit. This would not be the last time that he did that. Following such a populist smash hit like Inception would be no easy feat for even the most accomplished director, but Nolan was up to the task in the form of his final installment in the Dark Knight trilogy, the epic war film, The Dark Knight Rises. Picking up 8 years after the death of Harvey Dent and the disappearance of Batman, Gotham is experiencing uninterrupted peacetime in the form of the Dent Act, which has all but washed away crime completely. That is, at least, until the city is once again infiltrated by the League of Shadows. This invasion comes in the form of Bane, a mercenary who claims he will fulfill Ra's al Ghul's destiny and bring Gotham to its knees. This is the first true physical test of Batman's strength, as he has never faced an opponent who can actually break him. After doing so, Bane makes it clear to the Dark Knight that this is a battle for his soul as well, locking him away in a remote prison as Gotham falls into chaos. Nolan and his brother and co-writer drew inspiration from comic storylines like Nightfall, the one where Bane breaks Batman's back, and No Man's Land, but also, very importantly, Charles Dickens's A Tale of Two Cities. It is a film about the citizens of a city taking control back from the corrupt bureaucrats, tech oligarchs, and politicians who, quote, live so large and leave so little for the rest of us, as Catwoman, played by Anne Hathaway, says in a memorable ballroom dance scene. It would seem that Bane is giving power back to the people. The League of Shadows always comes in disguise as great liberators, but in reality, he has cut Gotham off from the rest of the world, is prowling the streets with tanks, and has planted a bomb that no one but maybe Lucius Fox can disarm. The film was divisive when it first came out, much more so than any previous Nolan project, and the director was faced with many tough questions about where the film stood on a militarized police force, the Occupy Wall Street movement, and the interpretation of Batman as a fascistic character. These are all legitimate concerns, but the film makes clear that Bane and the real brain behind the brawn, Talia al Ghul, are warlords who seek to control and suppress more than they intend to liberate. I think my main issue with the film is in fact Talia and the inclusion of the link back to Batman Begins. It's an understandable story device and one that we see in sequels all the time, but I kind of think Cotillard is miscast and the last 20 minutes of the movie kind of invalidates so much of what came before it. It is also a pretty crushing 2 hours and 45 minutes long, the film's other big criticism. However, I still think it is a great war film with killer action set pieces and about as well an ending to the trilogy as one can hope for. All the story threads are tied up, and Bruce can finally hang up the cape and cowl, leaving it for the next generation. In a way, I think the coda to this film is Nolan's own personal goodbye to Batman. With his last film leaving audiences cold and divided, Nolan returned to a primal emotion for his next project, love. He also turned to one of the primary silver screen preoccupations of his youth for the first time, space. Before he had even written the screenplay, Nolan began working with Hans Zimmer on the music for Interstellar. The director wanted to start from an emotional place, and in those early sessions, he talked with the composer a lot about fatherhood. The film was made under the working title Flora's Letter, an homage to Nolan's daughter, who was the same age as the character of Murphy. I very much related to the dilemma of somebody who is having to go off and do this thing, leave his kids, whom he clearly wants to be with, but really wants to go do this thing. My job is something that I absolutely love. I consider myself unbelievably lucky to do it, but there is a lot of guilt involved in doing that. A lot of guilt. So Interstellar came from a very personal place. The film stars Matthew McConaughey as Cooper, a pilot and engineer turned farmer, who is doing his best to provide for his family during a blight that has decimated Earth's food supply. With the help of his daughter Murph, he discovers the remnants of NASA, where a small group of scientists and astronauts are planning to use a wormhole to find livable planets for humanity's future. Cooper, being a natural explorer, enlists to pilot the spacecraft, much to the dismay of his daughter, who feels he is abandoning her. The tricky thing with space travel, as we learn in the film, is relativity, and as more time passes on Earth than at the edge of the solar system, Cooper's kids eventually outgrow him. They have grown up in what to him has only been a few years while he is off adventuring, something that was clearly on Nolan's mind personally as he made the film. As Cooper is trying to find sustainable life, we see his daughter, played in adulthood by Jessica Chastain, trying to solve the problem of gravity and interpret the strange anomalies in her bedroom. The film's climax provides a mind-bending, surreal answer to these anomalies, culminating in the extraordinary line said by Murph, "You were my ghost." When I saw the film, I was very wowed by the visual majesty of it. There is no mistaking that this is Nolan's 2001 moment. So much of the actual space stuff in this movie is not only drawing on that film, but reinterpreting it. Nolan enlisted theoretical physicist Kip Thorne, an expert in black holes and wormholes, as a consultant on the movie to have it look and feel as accurate to real scientific theory as possible. And the visual results of that are just outstanding. But at the time, I found the film pretty sappy and sentimental. I also thought it was hilarious that thousands of light years from Earth, on a frozen planet possibly containing life, two astronauts would get into a fist fight. However, upon rewatch, I can't deny this film's power. The cast is remarkable, the set pieces are breathtaking, the pipe organ score is incredibly rewarding and emotional. I also really love TARS. And to its credit, this is one of Chris Nolan's most popular and most rewatched films. On Letterboxd, this movie has been logged by almost 8 million people and has almost 4 million likes with a 4.4 average rating. It is an undeniable monolith in the online film community, and as of no surprise, it made a worldwide total of $681 million at the box office, setting record for IMAX theaters in the process. Interstellar is also still the largest scale story Nolan has ever created, unless The Odyssey somehow outdoes it this summer. In this era, Nolan continued trying things he had never done before. Freed from the shackles of studio IP, he wanted to challenge himself in new ways. After visiting the Churchill War Rooms in London, his wife Emma showed him the book Forgotten Voices of Dunkirk by Joshua Levine, inspiring him to, for the first time, write a story based on actual historical events. Dunkirk, of course, depicts the incredibly pivotal time during World War II, where almost 400,000 men were trapped on a beach in northern France as aerial bombers steadily tried to wipe them out. By all accounts, it was hell on Earth, and Nolan realizes this in 3 separate but interlocked spatial and temporal battlegrounds: land, sea, and air. It is quite possibly the closest the director will ever get to making a horror movie, and is a complete tonal 180 from Interstellar, continuing his work with Zimmer, as well as cinematographer Hoyte van Hoytema, whose truly breathtaking shots here looked as if they are ripped straight from history. Nolan went with mostly unknown actors for the roles of the young soldiers to get a more grounded reality as to not distract the audience with famous faces, Harry Styles notwithstanding. On the Mole, which is the long concrete walkway leading from the beach to the evacuation ships, Kenneth Branagh tries to pull together the men while pondering the futility of getting home. You can practically see it, he says. This section of the film lasts 1 week, according to the titles. In the air, Tom Hardy and Jack Lowden engage in dogfights to protect the men on the beach, but only have enough fuel for one return trip. This sequence lasts 1 hour. In the sea, civilian boats have been requisitioned by the government for soldier transport, and Mark Rylance, along with his son and a young Barry Keoghan, rescue a downed soldier in the ocean, played by Cillian Murphy, who is desperate not to return to Dunkirk. This ordeal lasts 1 day. In typical Nolan fashion, we see these events isolated and weaving into one another, gradually placing where we are in time and in the story at large as the final crescendo of the rescue comes to a head. Dunkirk is a masterfully accomplished feat of filmmaking. It looks and feels utterly authentic. It's shot like a documentary combined with a David Lean epic. It's an extraordinarily tight movie, one of Nolan's shortest at just 1 hour and 45 minutes. However, it's another where it feels to me mostly like the director is honing his creative chops and doesn't offer much emotionally. Notably, there are only 2 women in this movie, and both are minimal background roles. All that isn't to say that it's less enjoyable as a viewing experience, and seeing this in the theater was truly an audiovisual treat. At the time of release, Dunkirk became the highest-grossing World War II film globally at $530 million, until Nolan himself topped that some years later, the second time he would revisit historical events on the big screen. But before that, the director took another hard left turn, straight into spy territory. As we've learned with the likes of Inception and The Dark Knight, Nolan often thinks of images years before he ever executes them on screen. They linger and stay with him persistently. One of his more interesting images concerned time travel, something he seemingly had already done in each one of his movies. He says, "I've always been interested in time and the manipulation of time in my films, but with all these things that I've flirted with, I've never done a time travel film. Interstellar would like a word." This is not really a time travel film, but that notion of inverted time, the jumping off point, was the imagery of the bullets coming out of the wall, an idea I'd been sitting on for a very long time, 20 to 25 years. This, of course, is Tenet, Nolan's James Bond-inspired action movie starring John David Washington as a character simply called the protagonist. He is a member of a secret organization tasked with preventing a future apocalypse by tracing objects and weapons that are traveling backward through time. It is widely considered his most confusing and nonsensical film, as the events of the narrative both expand and contract as the film proceeds, and through its quite long 2.5 hours, we feel like we know even less at the end of the movie than we did at the start. In this way, Nolan invents a kind of eternal recurrence. The film could be played on a loop endlessly, either forward or backward. It's probably the one I personally struggle with the most, although the action achieved here is undoubtedly some of his best. The reverse fight choreography between the protagonist and his inverted future self, the car chase and reverse car crash, and the opera house operation are all genuinely inventive and mind-boggling. I truly will never know how Nolan put some of this stuff on film, because it isn't as simple as just reversing some of the footage. Tenet has been picked apart by critics as one of his most inscrutable and emotionally cold movies, but it wasn't until a few years ago that the movie was reclaimed as a pure vibes experience. The less you try to understand it and just settle in for the wild ride, the more enjoyable the act of watching it is. I've now seen it 3 times, and although it's still not one of my favorites, I've found more to love about it with each viewing. John David Washington is incredibly convincing as a James Bond-like operative, Robert Pattinson as his partner Neil is suave and sophisticated, and Kenneth Branagh as the Russian weapons dealer Sador is menacing and cruel. Once again, though, the female characters, especially Sator's wife, Catherine, played by Elizabeth Debicki, are given the short shrift of being tortured and oppressed and subsumed by the men in the movie, although she does get her just revenge at the end. Tenet was the unfortunate product of the 2020 COVID pandemic. While Nolan insisted that it must be released in theaters, audiences did not show up in the mass ways that they had always before, making just $58 million in the US with another $300 million overseas. However, it was his most expensive project to date, costing roughly $350 million including marketing. It was released day and date on HBO Max and marked the director's last collaboration with Warner Brothers after he was extremely disappointed with the handling of not only his movie, but of other properties in 2020. 3 years and a new studio later, Nolan would craft what would be a monumentally defining moment in his career. During the making of Tenet, Robert Pattinson gifted Christopher Nolan with a collected anthology of speeches by nuclear physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, seeding the ideas of the director's next project. He said of the book, "It's eerie reading because they're wrangling with this thing they've unleashed. How's that going to be controlled? It's just this most monstrous responsibility. Once that knowledge is out there in the world, what can you do? You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube." It's possible that the director saw some of his own life's work in this story. In the wake of the Dark Knight trilogy, superhero films, in particular the MCU, became the center of cultural consciousness and the movie-going experience, with audiences going all in on big-budget, brightly colored popcorn spectacle as opposed to grounded character pieces. Nolan has always had one foot in each camp, grappling with his love of action filmmaking and an equal love for quiet drama and noir. Oppenheimer, his multiple Oscar-winning character study of the renowned scientist, attempts to do both. The majority of the film concerns highly intelligent, well-dressed men deliberating in courts and classrooms about the fate of humanity, but it also contains a few of the most thrilling set pieces Nolan has ever staged, culminating in the mind-blowing Trinity test, as the scientists attempt to find an answer to what will actually happen when their dangerous creation is released into the world. The film is Nolan's most grown-up and adult one in years, featuring rampant anxiety, a suicide, and a few extremely awkward and somewhat comical sex scenes. Cillian Murphy plays the physicist in his first star lead turn in a Nolan project, and is surrounded by a veritable who's who of well-known actors, including Nolan regulars like Branagh, Oldman, and Damon, as well as newcomers like Emily Blunt, Florence Pugh, Josh Hartnett, Robert Downey Jr., Rami Malek, and director Benny Safdie. Oppenheimer is based on the biography American Prometheus by Kai Bird and Martin Sherman, and follows the life of the man through his college years, to his creation of the bomb, to his dramatic fall from grace in the aftermath of World War II. As Nolan said, he is grappling with the scope of his creation and what it will mean for the future of humanity, a man in a suit trying to solve a puzzle. In the movie's final moments, Oppie remarks to his mentor, Albert Einstein, that he believes they destroyed the world, ending the movie on a dour and dread-inducing note. It is in direct opposition to Nolan's otherwise hopeful and whimsical endings of Inception, The Dark Knight, or Interstellar. I was properly awed by the sheer scale and breadth of the film when I saw it in the summer of 2023. At 3 hours, it is Nolan's longest film, and the last hour has often been the most criticized aspect of it, shifting more towards Downey's narrative at his cabinet appointment hearing. This sequence plays out in black and white, compared to the exquisite color of Oppenheimer's story. The film features the second time Nolan works with composer Ludwig Göransson, who he claims to borrow from time to time from director and colleague Ryan Coogler. Göransson truly outdoes himself with this score in every sense of the word, which netted him his second Oscar after Black Panther. The film also won 6 more Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director, finally getting Nolan the critical recognition he had so long been denied. Released the same weekend as Barbie, the film was part of the Barbenheimer phenomenon that carried the box office of 2023 to unbelievable heights. For its part, Nolan's film made over $900 million, with $190 million of that coming from IMAX receipts alone. This made it the third highest grossing R-rated film of all time, behind, you guessed it, two comic book movies, Joker and Deadpool and Wolverine. While I greatly admire the craft of the film, I find watching it a bit taxing. The Trinity test is arguably one of the best things ever put on screen, but the constant arguing and depositions and old white men talking behind each other's backs can get a little old past the 2-hour mark. Cillian Murphy is superb and is well deserving for his Oscar, but it still feels to me like the latest in a long line of Nolan movies I can't quite emotionally connect to. Whether the director gets back to that human element of his early films that I found so attractive will all depend on next month's release of his latest epic, The Odyssey. So, now that we've gone through all the films of Christopher Nolan, what have we learned about him and his work? I think the first thing, if you watch his films closely, is that Nolan is clearly a master craftsman, working at the height of the Hollywood studio level. He consistently hires the best department heads, the best people for each job, from his production designer Nathan Crowley, to composers like Zimmer and Gordonson, to cinematographers, Hoyte van Hoytema and Wally Pfister. Also, the actors he chooses are often the top of their class. Bale, Hardy, Murphy, Damon, Caine, and Hathaway have remained in demand and relevant to the culture of movies, and many of them have given some of their best performances in Nolan projects. It also can't be understated the importance that his wife, Emma Thomas, has on his work. They share many creative duties on the films, and Thomas has made her name as a top-level Hollywood producer through their collaborations together. Nolan's brother Jonathan has gone on to an illustrious career in television with projects like Westworld and Person of Interest. Clearly, Nolan is a family man, with almost all of his projects being family affairs, and films like Inception, Interstellar, and even Tenet, all dealing with familial relationships and Nolan's struggles with a work-life balance. Also, with the success of Oppenheimer, Chris Nolan is now in critical esteem, whereas his previous work went unnoticed, mostly by the Academy. By all accounts, he is very well liked by the industry, with his frequent collaborators having nothing but good things to say about him. He is also known as a workhorse, always standing beside the camera during shooting to immerse himself in the process, rarely sitting down or taking breaks, chugging black tea all day long, and sharing in the workload of his cast and crew. Few directors put the time and effort into every facet of their work that Nolan does, especially when it comes to music, storyboarding, editing, performance, and cinematography. He has been widely lauded for using the genres of noir, science fiction, and superhero storytelling to make deeply personal projects that are both big-budget spectacles and grounded character pieces. But as we've learned, he could maybe use a hand writing female characters. Perhaps he could even hire a woman screenwriter in the future. For me, it's hard to not feel a bit sentimental about this writer-director whose work helped shape much of my movie-going experience from my teens through my 20s. Even if I don't always connect to the stories or feel like they're just showing off in the sense of scale, Nolan's work as a filmmaker still amazes me to this day. With a few exceptions, I can throw on any of his movies at any point in my life and still be in awe of them. He's one of the only directors working today who I know I'll see whatever project he has in theaters simply because it is a Christopher Nolan movie. And I know many other people feel the same way, but it would be nice maybe in the future if he could get back to some tidier run times. The bladder can only hold for so long, Chris. Even after all the work and research that went into this video, I still find the man himself a bit of a mystery, which is how I like it. I don't need to know every detail about his personal life, or even necessarily what he thinks his films mean. I liken it to my relationship to David Lynch or Stanley Kubrick. I adore the work for what it is, even though I have my criticisms of it. I don't need to know everything. I can project my own meanings and interpretations on it because that is what great art does. It allows you to see yourself in it. Nolan's movies are mystery boxes and magic tricks that don't necessarily have to be solved or revealed. I struggled to figure out how to end this video. I wanted to tie it back to the beginning as Nolan does, but the thing is, I'm still thinking about how he does it. His endings are just as confounding as his beginnings, because to him, they are reverberations of each other. I will let the director explain. Reverberation is the word. It's the echo of it. We used it in Interstellar very literally, but it exists in all my films and endings. A crescendo with reverberations is a great way to go. The end of Dunkirk has a lot of similarities to the end of Memento. Openings are very precious because you have the attention of the audience in a way that is very difficult to get, but endings have to be built to in such a way that you regain that attention, so that you have a cumulative effect, a culmination. You have to focus the audience's attention at the end of the film the same way you were granted it at the beginning. So, were you watching closely? Thank you to everyone who watched this video. If you like this kind of thing, please subscribe to my channel, Filmsplaining with Martin Strange. I also have a podcast of the same name. Let me know your thoughts and feelings on the work and life of Christopher Nolan here in the comments. I will do my best to respond to each of you. Until next time, happy viewing.